if we build young people throughout high school into citizens that leave school with the skills to challenge prejudice and inequity, imagine the type of society we're going to be building.
Welcome to A Third Place, a podcast about the importance of public spaces in the personal and professional development of prominent Australians. This series celebrates the 60th anniversary of the University of Melbourne's Baillieu Library as a special third place between home and work. I'm your host, Peter McPhee. So far in this series, we've explored a whole variety of benefits that third places have to offer. For example, their ability to foster communication and community, as well as personal growth. In this episode, I speak with Lucy Thomas. Lucy is the CEO of Project Rockit, Australia's youth-driven movement against bullying, hate and prejudice. As a keynote speaker and facilitator, Lucy has worked with hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. Her work has been honoured by UNICEF, and she is a recipient of an Order of Australia medal for her services to youth and the issue of bullying. Our conversation is in two parts. The first about her work around the issue of bullying, and the second about the importance of making public spaces safe. I began by asking her to elaborate on the purposes of Project Rockit.
Right. So as you named, Project Rockit is Australia's youth-driven movement against bullying, hate and prejudice, but it hasn't always been that way. It actually started out as two sisters fresh out of school who were desperate to create change on this big issue of bullying that affects so many young people. And those sisters were myself and my little sister. But we didn't intend to start an organisation. We basically just wanted to create change, however small, in schools to pretty much drive young people's capacity to create positive change in the world around them. You know, for us, like finishing school, we really did feel that we cared about our peers and those around us. And unfortunately, though, we're still spoken down to as young people. And so that very simple premise of wanting to put this issue back in the hands of young people and explore what they can do and what kind of change they want to see in the world is what drove us to start Project Rockit. So now 13 years on, the organisation's grown over time and plotted around the country and suddenly, I guess, experienced this huge surge of support and reached hundreds of thousands of young people all over the country. And so now it's much more of a movement that drags us along. But to begin with, it was a community-oriented action project.
Was there a particular moment, a sort of light bulb moment where you and your sister said, right, let's do it?
There actually was. Immediately after I handed in my honours thesis, I hit the road and jumped on a plane to Europe to actually see in the flesh all of the art that I'd been studying. I think one of the challenges of living in a vast island continent like Australia is that a lot of the art that we see in books or reproductions of, and I wanted to get out there and see for myself these works that have changed and moved all of us and changed the world. However, as I was doing this, I suppose you could call it a bit of a pilgrimage around Europe with my backpack, and it was just me checking out gallery after museum after gallery. I started thinking, I think I want more than this in my life. You know, I started thinking about how these days people don't go to galleries to consume creative works, or I think they should, and I personally still do. But we tend to consume creativity and imagination through very different means. You know, we expect it in the way that we can, in our purchases, we expect like a sense of identity fulfillment, or we expect it when we turn on the television or go and see a film, or in the ways that we're learning in schools. And so I really got thinking about how I could take that idea of creative thinking and utilize it as a tool for change even prior to university age. You know, how could we be creating that change in schools? And so shortly after arriving back, we actually ended up having to, my sister and I, go on a family holiday to attend a family wedding. And during that time, I guess having forced downtime, embarked on one of those sister conversations that I'm sure lots of siblings out there find themselves having from time to time, that you're really honest and accountable about your life and where you're at and where you're heading. And I guess for us, we just started talking about our frustration with many of the issues that exist in the world, and especially for school-aged young people, and how, you know, somebody should really do something about it. And I guess that's when we had the dawning thought.
Was this something that you became aware of actually at school?
Definitely. I mean, I think that it would be a very common experience for a lot of young people to see the way that bullying plays out among your peers. So a lot of us encounter it firsthand, but also all of us witness it. It's unavoidable. And so it can seem like many of us, especially those who are confident enough and perform academically well enough to step into university, finish school well prepared and, developed and grown and nourished. But some people don't. And I think when you finish school, you can kind of look around and see that some people also just seem to drop off the face of the earth. And when you look back across their time at school, it's really no surprise because of the way that they've been treated or the way that they've started to over time deny themselves opportunities or feel that they have to change who they are to fit in.
So, Lucy, lots of young people at schools these days are aware of the issue of bullying. I mean, I've certainly had the conversation with my grandchildren. But if you had to explain how and why you and your sister decided to do something about it, how would you go about explaining that?
Right. So I think for my sister and I, the issue of bullying is much more complex than the stereotypes that we see in the media or in, popular culture or in Hollywood movies. And you hear the word bullying and I think most people tend to cringe. Same goes with the word cyberbullying. We think of these like really archaic stereotypes about like the powerful and the powerless or cliches about the wrestle for popularity in high school, that type of thing. But for us, when we really look to the heart of it, I think bullying is underpinned by really human struggles to work out who we are and what we stand for, how to strike that balance in finding belonging and also stepping apart from the group to challenge the behaviour that we disagree with, as well as creating cultures that celebrate and accept diversity and understanding what that means, while at the same time having the courage to call out behaviour that we disagree with in this world. So we're really thinking about the really complex issues that fall under the umbrella of bullying and thinking about how if we build young people throughout high school into citizens that leave school with the skills to challenge prejudice and inequity, imagine the type of society we're going to be building. And so for us, it was that kind of drive that we were like, well, there's nothing stopping us. We're never going to have less to lose than we do right now, so let's give it a crack.
One of the things that intrigues me is that you therefore made a commitment to spending a lot of your time dealing with unpleasant things and helping young people come to terms with unpleasantness and how to deal with it, to create safer places. And I'm wondering, during these 13 years now of doing that, have you had places that you've kept as a way of a place where you can find sustenance and your own peace?
Yeah, definitely.
What sort of places?
The most nurturing place that I've found in my life in navigating hardship has actually been within a Project Rockit workshop. And without diving down the rabbit hole, it was probably 6 or 7 years into Project Rockit that I encountered for the first time in my life a really severe and horrific experience of bullying myself. Obviously, like most people had encountered the knocks and blows that people face throughout high school, but this was particularly bad and threatened, I guess, my safety at university. I'd returned to uni at this stage. At home, there were threats against my career, so it was pretty pervasive. And yet I still found that I was able to show up to work and able to step into a Project Rockit workshop and actually find more meaning from tackling this issue and a greater understanding of the resilience that people bring when they can survive bullying and the power that they carry when they can overcome the nastiness and cruelty that exists in this world. And for me, it really connected me with the point. The point of the work that we're trying to do. And not only that, it actually shone a light on, just the incredible might of people who show up in the face of just, the nasty ways that people can treat each other in this world.
Are you saying then that you actually draw strength and sustenance from being in workshops rather than necessarily having a place that's just your own?
Yeah, I've always been an introvert, so I definitely draw strength from being on my own. And to cite a few introverted cliches, I love a sunset, love a walk with the dog, and love a podcast on my own. But to be honest, at the same time, I think for those of us who look inward to find our strength and comfort, it can be sometimes too easy to stay in your own company. And for me, going through a really difficult time highlighted to me that we really can rely on each other as human beings to create comfort through suffering. And so being in a Project Rockit workshop for me is about creating those spaces that actually we're here to talk about really difficult issues, but they're full of joy and they're full of courage and they're full of people expressing who they are and what they believe in. And to me, that's the ultimate remedy to the bullying that exists and is timeless.
Let me ask you about another type of pressure, a rather new type of pressure for you, and that is the problems that are coming from the success of Project Rockit itself. I mean, it's wonderful that some big corporations, the Australian government, is now turning their attention to what you've got to offer and asking you to play a role on advisory boards and all the rest of it. But that must put its own sort of pressure on you in terms of time and energy. And how do you manage that?
You're right to name that with growth and opportunity comes pressure and stress, to some extent. I think for us, the thing that's really important about those opportunities is that we put them back in the hands of young people. And so, we're not in it on our own. Immediately, as we've had more and more opportunities to advocate for young people's voices, we found it important to set up the structures for young people to actually speak. So for us, when we joined Facebook's Global Safety Advisory Board or the federal government's e-safety working group, these are impressive titles, but I think the terrifying part of that would be being expected to speak for an entire generation, which I'm not competent to do. I don't think that anyone is. So, working with a small brains trust of young people who reflect diverse experiences and just understanding that it's not my job to speak for every single person, but I can listen, I can be an earpiece and a better mouthpiece when I am for the issues that young people face is a really... it really takes the pressure off, and it means that it makes me feel much more humble in that role as well. It's much less about what I think and more and much less pressure then for me to come up with all of the answers, and much more about asking the right questions and being prepared to listen.
And so, Lucy, do you think that over the years that the answers that people are giving to these questions, the attitudes they've got towards bullying have changed?
Yeah, the ways that I'm really seeing more recently things start to change is that I think we're getting a bit of panic and fear burnout. People are so over hearing about how awful the internet is when we spend so much of our lives on there and we also love it. And all of us know that it just creates such great opportunities too. So how can we not only prevent online harm and actually create a better world, and how can we lead change online that can then spill out into the wider physical world, which we're actually seeing quite a lot. And just quickly, one example is students striking against climate inaction. It's a perfect example of how organising communities online can have real physical world consequences. And so, I think people are starting to see that there's such an incredible potential for us not only to shut down harm online, but actually do better. Actually look to the leaders who are navigating the online world well when our own physical, political, whoever leaders are letting us down.
Lucy, if I could raise a very sensitive and certainly current issue, and that's to do with debates at present around limits to freedom of speech, limits to religious freedom, because they're seen by some people to infringe on other freedoms, the freedom to feel safe from discriminatory language, even hateful language. And this is, of course, in the context of debates after the passing of same-sex marriage legislation and issues around the LGBTI community. I wonder what your reaction is.
Yeah. Well, I'll name from the outset that I'm a proud and lucky, fortunate member of the LGBTI community. And I think one of the things that unfortunately fuels that discourse and those views are politicizing people's identities. So whether that is your LGBTI identity or your religious, faith-based identity, when we use, people's markers of lived experience as fodder for political discourse, we inevitably pit people against each other, and I just don't think it serves anyone. So I'm often frustrated by the lack of leadership on these issues, and instead, just throwing everyone's identities on the table to fight it out, because I think we see the worst in each other when we do.
Lucy, before we move on to talk about the importance of third places for you personally, I wonder whether there's one particular piece of advice that you would like to give to young people who might hear this?
I think for anyone going through the types of experiences that we've touched on today, whether that be, encountering online hate or bullying or feeling a lack of acceptance in your life or, feeling down about the current state of discussion in, politics, whatever it might be. I don't want this to sound like a cliche, but I really do think that now more than ever we need allyship in this world, and to name that you do have allies around you. It's a matter of finding them. And just quickly, I'd name that an ally isn't necessarily your best friend. They might not necessarily agree with all of your views. They might not be someone who's super literate about how to talk about emotional stuff, but there's someone that you can go to seek support or to connect you with support, someone who maybe is passionate about social justice and making sure that people have a place to be included. And I think that, we can be looking for our allies and looking for ways that we can act as allies every day. And I think just we currently live in a climate where people seem to be so pitted against each other and people's global views are so polarized. So it's exciting to think of ways that we can, through allyship, I guess, bridge that gap.
People in these situations don't need to feel alone, and they need to think of people who may not, as you say, be their best friends, but people who could be allies. They don't have to put up with this on their own. There are people out there who care. Yeah.
I think the lie that bullying tells us is that you are alone when, in fact, time will prove that lie wrong.
Yes, I think you're right. And perhaps that's a good segue into thinking about places where people go to be alone, but not really to feel alone. Certainly for me and for many other people, of course, the Baillieu was a place rather like that. And I'm wondering whether that was the case for you as well. Did you have a favourite spot that you used to use in the Baillieu?
I think I loved, honestly, the places where you can eavesdrop on other people's conversations. So I know there are quiet working spaces, but there are also some spaces that enabled discussion. And even though I wasn't there to talk to anyone else, I was quite happy to pick up on their conversations.
Well, it's one of the nice things about libraries is that now, compared to when I was a student and you were hushed as soon as you opened your mouth, there actually are places now in the library that people can work together in groups and talk. It's quite permissible, yeah.
And you can learn so much just by sitting on the next table. They don't even know you're listening.
That's right.
I think that shared physical community spaces are so important as we start to grow and as we develop a global view. I think that for so many young people, especially growing up in regional centres, it's a big thing that we see at Project Rockit, is that shared communal spaces are where you see outside of your own paradigm, your own life. And I mentioned earlier eavesdropping on people's conversations at the Baillieu. It's a perfect example of that. By sitting in a shared space, you can hear different lived experiences. People share, express candidly who they are and where they're coming from and where they're at. You can learn by overhearing ideas shared. And I think that idea of just coming from a mindset of listening is so powerful. I think so often online we can be really focused on what we have to say. There can be a pressure to say something or post something or constantly be sharing something. And I think it's really kind to balance that with, the perspective of what am I listening to here in the world around me? What am I taking in? What am I accommodating? What ideas can I absorb? How can I grow? And I think that shared physical spaces are really incredible avenues to doing exactly that.
So, Lucy, you're a remarkable person in that you obviously draw sustenance, draw strength from being with like-minded people, being in group situations, rather than necessarily being the sort of person who needs to have free time to yourself to walk along a beach or whatever. Is that right?
Yeah, that said, though, I would say growing up, one of the places that acted as a source of nourishment for me was the beach. I grew up 50 metres from the beach and had to catch a bus, a train and a tram to get to school, and often would leave off the last leg, which was a bus, so that I could walk home along the beach. And nature remains a place that I find incredibly fulfilling and incredibly nourishing as well. When I moved away, I started doing what I called moon training because I was worried that I find such a sense of comfort and ease being by the ocean, and then it's such a reminder, a healthy feeling of being small, a reminder of all of our smallness in a huge, vast and brilliant and beautiful universe. So moon training for me was trying to look at the moon and use that as a reminder of my smallness because, now I live in the inner city and I don't have that access to the ocean. But, I think it's about finding, for me, tiny and regular ways to connect with the vastness of everything that I just find, incredibly grounding and an important reminder that in 200 years my work won't even be relevant, it won't matter, people won't remember it, but I know why I'm doing what I'm doing, and so remaining true to it.
So, Lucy, we've talked about the Baillieu as a special kind of third place, and you've also spoken about your love of the outdoors, your love of being near water. Earlier on in the podcast, you were talking about art galleries and museums, and I'm wondering whether they've continued to be special places for you.
I love the idea of art galleries and museums as third spaces. I remember the first time that I ever went to MoMA in New York. Actually, the only photos I took were photos of people taking photos of themselves standing next to Van Gogh's The Starry Night. I just found it like an incredible act of tourism that people want to take a picture of themselves next to a painting, as well as, at the Pompidou in Paris, which is one of my favourite galleries, sitting in the public library and as a recent art graduate, just drawing life in the gallery and noticing the ways that people sleeping rough had a place to read the paper and being able to connect with different people coming and going. Seeing the way that art, I think, gives voice to perspectives that otherwise aren't heard and that really do have the capacity to change the world. So for me, I'm also excited to see galleries becoming more and more participatory and accessible for people. So Mona's such an awesome example of that. I went there recently, hadn't been in Hobart, and just seeing the way that the very experience of walking through a gallery, doesn't require a university education. It doesn't require, it's not an elite experience anymore. It's something that's becoming much more accessible, which is super exciting.
That's right. And I think that public libraries play that role to perfection as well, because they're places that don't discriminate against who wanders in. They're safe places, and they're places where people from every background can hang around without having to buy something.
Right. Yep.
You can spend the whole day there reading the newspaper if you want to, or even having a bit of a doze. But I think that while university libraries have a particular function, I think they're connected to the role of public libraries in general as major third spaces for people, and for particular groups of people, they actually are quite fundamental to their daily routines.
And for so many people, to their safety as well. I'm already, I just had a memory walking past a little public library in North Melbourne the other day, and it was absolutely raining cats and dogs, and I saw a tiny little old lady just sitting in a chair. She wasn't reading a book, she wasn't reading a paper, she wasn't talking to anyone. She was just sitting in a chair and being safe and taking shelter.
Yes, a story like that highlights for me what's been one of the key themes running through everything you've said, really, Lucy, and that's the importance to you of trying to ensure that all sorts of places, whether they're university libraries or playgrounds or classrooms, are places where people feel safe and confident about being who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hearing that description, I also think of our ever-evolving online world as well as one of those spaces. And I think that serves as a great example, because the online world highlights that the power that we're afforded can be misused. We can use it to be a keyboard warrior or a troll or hate on other people and be really nasty, or, utilize images that they sent to us privately and leak them. We have the power to do all of those things. But by the same token, online, that same power of being shielded behind a screen gives us access to greater agency to create positive change. So I think in lots of these third spaces, often we face a double-edged sword. Through community, we're more exposed to the risk of being hurt or the risk of meeting harm, but also we have a greater opportunity for connection and to be united to create the type of positive outcomes we want to see for ourselves, for each other, and for society more broadly. So I think in these third spaces, we have to work out, how do we commune? How do we create community? How do we come together and create connection in these safe ways? And I think that third spaces, as you're kind of talking about them, are becoming more and more the ways that we have to work out how to engage with our own humanity, which is pretty exciting.
Thanks for listening to A Third Place. I'm your host, Peter McPhee. Today's episode is brought to you by the Baillieu Library and Learning Environments at the University of Melbourne. It was produced by Chris Parlow and Phil Shaw. Recorded by Gavin Neighbour at the Horwood Recording Studio. Edited by Phil Shaw, David Withers and Catherine Hayhoe. Rory Mullen is our intern, and our associate producers are Andrea Hurt and Ashley Sutherland for the Baillieu Library, and Eileen Wall for Learning Environments.